This comes from a piece of work that Homi Karas, Annalisa Britzon and I are just about to publish, God willing, which is somewhat immodestly but accurately titled A Rough Roadmap to the things that you've been talking to. And I should stress that it's a roadmap and not a sat-nav. You're allowed to make your own use of it, and including make your own mistakes in using it. And indeed, it can be applied differently in different contexts. I'll come back to that in a minute. And logically, we should have really been talking about this sort of more at the beginning than now, but this is just as good time as any, because I think some of the comments that I've heard, including some of Charles's comments about the Addis agenda, you'll find reflected in this, and we have some quite granular recommendations, which I'm not going to go into unless there's time for later on. On the Addis agenda, I would say that one way of looking at it is we calculate that there's roughly 30 countries around the world that are sort of chronic donors, and may well remain chronic donors in one form or another, countries and maybe some entities, including the EU as a multilateral. There are roughly 30 countries that even in the foreseeable future, let's say 2030 horizon, will remain heavy recipients of aid in proportion to some of the other aggregates. They won't have a lot of alternatives still. And then there are 130 countries that are in neither group. And what are they going to be interested in? What is in it for them in Addis, I think, is a sort of a useful thought experiment. Okay, we have a little framework which is sort of incredibly simplified, hence a little bit rough. The little blue boxes are none other than the categories to which the SDGs, you may have seen this already before, were grouped by the International Committee of Experts on Sustainable Development Finance. And they're not watertight, of course, these three categories, but they serve to highlight the global public goods box for which we, in our work, really think about mitigation more than anything else. And then the sort of, if you like, the old MDGs and the heavy focus on infrastructure for growth and development, but of course infrastructure in such a form as will be green and sustainable. That's nothing particularly new. On the boxes, on the types of finance that you're going to hope to tap, and we don't privilege one type of finance for one kind of purpose by any means, we have regrouped them from the more conventional foreign, domestic, private, public sort of quadrumvirate to highlight loans on market or near market terms, or shall I say public borrowings on market or near market terms, in the green box in the middle. And we do that for a reason, because we think there's nowhere near enough of it, and we're particularly looking at this neuralgic point where official entities, bilateral and multilateral, are able to offer better than market terms, whatever we mean by that. And we've also done, and I think that links nicely to the preceding session, I believe it was a quote from Neil, from a South African Minister of Finance, the ways in which public finance, public domestic revenues and aid, really grant aid, not talking about loans, are to some extent to be considered in the same light. Of course, there's all kinds of questions about volatility and reliability, etc. Gloss over that for the moment. So what we do is we look at interactions between these, interactions between public and private, has come up already, interactions between grants and loans, and we do that, by the way, in a context where we think that real interest rates are going to remain low for quite a while. And that offers opportunities. That offers also opportunities to change the calculus of private investment towards things that have a high upfront cost and a long stream of benefits. Guess what? Renewable energy and other things having to do with climate change mitigation. So that's the sort of the way we look at it, and there's a strong focus on country-specific trade-offs. A little illustration there, which most of you have already heard of, in the sort of maquette, the World Bank's maquette modeling system. There has been a sort of investigation of several countries. Take the case of Uganda. You don't have to believe that these results are the right ones, but it just shows some of the trade-offs. Do you get more children in school by A, investing heavily on the supply side, public money spent on schools, or B, building roads, getting more crops to market, getting rural incomes out, getting parental demand for schools up? And the jury's out as to which of those strategies you should invest in more or less. Okay, I'm now trying to, yep, I am. We look at income categories and the futility of income categories. There's nothing new there. A lot of work being done by CGD and others on this. The vertical bars that you see there are very close to the low income, the middle income, and the total upper middle income advanced country cutoffs. It's on a log scale, so they're crunched a little bit closer together. On the green line, we're showing the vertiginous decline to effectively zero by, as you could imagine, the end of aid as such, ODA as such, over time. And the continuing green line shows the miserable paucity of other official flows, which are insufficient at all levels. But actually, if we disaggregated that, there's a sort of a flat heartbeat for that OOF. I won't go into that now. The red line is tax revenues. We suspect that this is showing perhaps a too conservative picture, which would have the blue line, meaning the total, actually have a bit more of a trough. But the reality is that the presence of government public finance and aid donor assisted heavy grant public finance, or ODA if you like, falls, has a sort of double dip, and in particular that dip is quite painful during the low middle income status. I can come back to the details of that primarily by asking Annalisa, who's probably lurking here somewhere in the background, to answer any tricky questions that you might have on the methodology. So as countries start to grow fast, their official support dips sharply. Later their revenue picks up, quite a lot later. And also, if we were to show you the same figures for foreign direct investment and for even something like remittances, which is not true private finance, but it's sometimes made equivalent to public finance, that doesn't correct at all. In fact, it actually, in some cases, accentuates the decline because foreign direct investment is present proportionately at very low levels of country. My third and last slide. Here's some of the sort of recommendations that bubble up if you take this sort of view, and we've broken them down. Each one of these has some more specific recommendations, including, I may say, getting better metrics on private finance, on guarantees, and on loans, which rubs up against the famous ODA concessionality story, which you probably heard about enough yesterday. So the first is ration grant assistance to where it's really needed, and that's the credit-worthy countries. In some of the work done for this paper, we find that the LDC and the small island developing states categories are pretty good predictors of low credit worthiness. They are, in fact, the most powerful drivers of that compared to income and other elements, which are, of course, also count at the margin. We also look at fiscal capacity, to sort of revaillant look at how much tax would you need on the rich to be able to pay your way out of transferring enough money to meet your own poverty gap. And we think that's a useful lens, even though there are some methodological problems. And we also look at fragility and vulnerability. If you're going to go into those countries with grants, you've got to find a way of improving the situation over time, and that flags up investing in rule of law support and trying to partner up where you can with private actors. That's the second recommendation. The third recommendation, it links in a little bit with what we've just heard about the multilateral development banks. Basically, there's been no significant change in the net transfers in even nominal terms for about 30 years of multilateral development banks to this whole picture, while of course in real terms they decline, except of course for the spikes, the serious spikes during the financial crises. So as an insurance proposition that might be quite useful as a real contributor, particularly to the missing middle problem that I've just outlined, they're not very good. And they could improve a lot. Now, whether it's by changing their capital rules, by getting them to find some way of integrating the various windows to sort of win-win, as the Asian Development Bank is trying to do, we could discuss, but that's for another discussion. And finally, and I think perhaps most controversial, thirdly, there has to be a lot more of this public-related finance. There also has to be policies that leverage it, but in very specific areas. We distinguish agriculture, natural resources, infrastructure, social enterprise, which a lot of people won't necessarily associate with private sector, that is to say, producing outputs such as education and health, and the IT, financial and retail services. So that none of that side is particularly new, but I hope you like the presentation that we'll have in the report about. And last, and perhaps most controversially, this morning we were asked by Simon what makes you particularly angry, and I said the hypocrisy to pretend that climate mitigation finance is not, for quite a while to come, going to be financed out of a back of aid. Once you've accepted, give up on it. It's not going to be new and additional, not mostly going to be new and additional. It's, you know, the emperor, all right, the emperor has clothes, we'll just ignore that. Then you've got to take in that there's going to be fairly big allocation distortions. If you compare the countries that need to decarbonize and those which are the primary beneficiaries of ODI, they're not the same list of countries. And you all know what I'm talking about, and that does cause a problem. We do have a solution, thank goodness, because of the financial market conditions that we find ourselves. The solution is to try to make investments in clean technology happen by the least amount of judicious use of public intervention possible, whether that's by a guarantee or an interest subsidy or something of the kind, or all of the above. Meanwhile, of course, you should continue to target adaptation on low-income countries, and particularly those that are directly vulnerable to climate change, such as low-lying islands and the like. I'll stop there. I hope that's useful as an introduction.